On a blessed windy day, a most beautiful and joyous engagement took place among the rejoicing townspeople, between the crown prince of the empire of Iferto, Jalos Orna Eferto, and the only daughter of Count Polly, Psyche Polly, and in the cheering crowd, only one was not rejoicing at the beautiful union. The one who once held the title of crown princess. The brilliant couple were about to leave for a vacation down south after their engagement. The townspeople continued to honor them, and at the same time, the two men did not hesitate to discuss the rumors surrounding the engagement. After all, it was said that initially Madame Psyche lost in the struggle for the right to be the crown princess, but the favoritism of the prince was excessive, and there was nothing that could be done about it, all because her only opponent was from the ducal family. Earlier, they had made an assassination attempt on the imperial family, but even that incident was rumored to have been fabricated so that His Highness would choose Lady Psyche. What is there to say? The crown prince might as well have just publicly announced a complete break with the House of Belial. This is definitely the decline of their family. The Duke's eldest daughter will probably have a hard time finding a suitor with her temperament. Though she's not a bad-looking woman, it's hard not to admit it. The man discussing all of this was even thinking of asking for the lady's hand in marriage, but the gentleman who was making his bones did not notice that Medea Belial was standing a few steps away from them. His companion barely had time to clamp his mouth shut before he said something else. Mistress Belial's servant asked her mistress not to waste her time on commoners with their long tongues. Medea, however, told the impudent man that she had memorized his face and left. The two remaining men were shocked. Did she really just leave? She didn't even punish them. The gentleman who had almost fallen under Melody Medea's wrath laughed nervously, just as he said the Belials were finished. His interlocutor grudgingly frowned at the shallowness of such judgments. This fool did not understand one simple truth. Silence can be much more frightening than 1,000 words. The next day, two townspeople were idly discussing the news. One of them said that a gentleman's body had been found on the shore. They said he had slipped and fallen, but there was a strange thing about this corpse. The man's tongue had been cut out. Lady Medea and her brother were on their way to their mother's chambers. Her condition had been poor lately. In the chambers they found their father over their sleeping mother and the doctor beside them. The doctor had disappointing news about the woman's health. She had always been physically weak, but this illness seemed to have worsened since her imprisonment. Unfortunate as it was, she might have a hard time surviving this year. As soon as father heard this, he became mad. He started to overturn the furniture in the room, and blood spilled. Everything went wrong because of that woman, Psyche. The maids gathered around Medea and began to suggest to their mistress that she teach the insolent girl a lesson. It's enough to send someone. All the more reason to deal with her without a bodyguard. Medea, however, did not appreciate the maid's impulse to leave Psyche alone. She should be more careful with her than the man who had shamelessly mud-eyed their house. If Psyche was attacked now, the crown prince would have no doubt who the culprit was, and he would come for Medea's head. However, the girl only looked calm. In fact, the lady was gnawing at the fact that Psyche must be with the crown prince now. Medea's anger would never subside. Meanwhile, the couple was vacationing peacefully in the south. Psyche beckoned the crown prince over to the merchant's small shop. He was selling so many lovely things, and the girl wanted to send the duke's daughter a gift. Jalos, the crown prince, could only wonder, did Psyche not know how to hate someone at all? After all, that's exactly what one should feel. After all, after everything the duke's daughter had done. But Psyche brushed it off. She knew that Medea would wait until she was approached first. The merchant, meanwhile, displayed something that was popular with the visitors. This gem was created from minerals that could only be found in the southern region. Its color was reminiscent of the ocean. The crown prince hummed satisfactorily and asked Psyche to be sure to send this as a gift. He would really like to see how the lady would react to it. Later, Lady Bella had the gift delivered to Lady Belial by a man who had been ordered to see to it that the box was opened. The maid immediately rushed to her defense, trying to besiege the impertinent man, but the lady interrupted her. The lady was not at all difficult, especially since Psyche was now the crown princess. Of course, Medea was worried that she wouldn't be able to hide her disappointment if... Lady Belial didn't finish her thought. Her face darkened. She set aside the open gift. Like his time, Psyche was especially attentive. The girl told the messenger that she would send the crown princess something in return. Satisfied with this answer, the man bowed and left. As soon as the door slammed behind him and the maid announced his departure, Medea grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on and threw it away. In a fit of rage, the girl even hurt herself before she could exhale. The box as well as the gift itself, the precious ring, ended up on the floor. Medea was filled with anger. How dare Psyche, having won the crown prince by pathetic means, send a ring under the guise of a gift to humiliate him? Lady Belial clenched her fists tighter. If Psyche wants war, she'll get it. Night fell on Earl Polly's mansion, and he fussed over Psyche, worried about the girl's health. She only waved away the excessive concern. Just then, a lush bouquet from a lady of the house of Belial was delivered to the room. The flowers were accompanied by a letter. In Medea's hand, it was written out that she wished to give this bouquet to Lady Psyche in return for her gift. The scent of these flowers should help the girl to sleep, so the lady advised to put them next to each other for the night. In the same letter, Medea suggested that they meet for a cup of tea sometime soon, and discuss all that had happened between them. Psyche trembled with happiness when she read it. The maid squinted at the mistress in disbelief. Could Lady Belial have sent such a letter? However, Psyche was overjoyed. After all, her sincerity had finally reached Medea. And while the crown princess ordered everything to be prepared for the tea party as soon as possible, the lady of House Belial looked at the suspicious vial with an unkind gaze. She had no doubt that her rival had fallen right into the trap she had laid. The next day, Psyche and Medea met outside Polly's mansion. Madame sincerely apologized for having invited the girl by short notice. Lady Medea assured her that everything was in order and suggested tea as she had bought tea leaves and sugar. The girls settled themselves on the veranda. Medea suggested adding sugar to the tea for sweetness. Psyche tasted the drink and marveled, suggesting that it would be a good idea for them to get one too. She sincerely didn't notice the catch, but the maids around her whispered restlessly. They were amazed that these two were really just talking quietly, and after all, the servants are worried that the guest might have done something to Madame again. Medea has noticed the servants' affection for Psyche, which isn't surprising though. The girl, after all, treats them like family despite their status. The embarrassed crown princess hurried to thank her for the kind words, but Lady Belial cut her interlocutor short. What she said about the servants was not a compliment. Couldn't Psyche hear how carefree the servants were with their tongues? If she still didn't realize the obvious, Medea was quite willing to call them out and slap them instead. The crown princess shuddered fearfully, immediately trying to take their blame, but was prevented from speaking by a knight standing near the table. He informed Lady Belial that she had better leave for the day, as Madame had to go to the temple tomorrow. This knight was from among those sworn to protect Polly's house since birth. A valuable dog who won't even listen to imperial orders for their sake. Medea, at the knight's words, arrogantly declared that she had no desire to stay in a place where she was treated so poorly. And without a long goodbye, she left Polly's mansion. The knight watched the carriage. He asked the maid about Madame Psyche. The woman replied that she was in her room trying to hold back her tears. The maid was sent to check on Madame again. She was horrified to find that the girl was feverish, though she had been fine a moment before. What had happened? The frightened servants wanted to call the doctor, but the knight forbade it. They couldn't call just anyone. If it came out that Madame was ill, then on the day of prayer, which is only once a year, the Duke's daughter would be the only one standing in the temple. The knight put on his cloak, asked to keep an eye on Madame, and galloped away from the mansion. His head was filled with thoughts. He had checked the flowers for poison, and the cups too, but after all they drank from the same teapot. Halfway there, his obedient horse suddenly threw off its rider and galloped off in an unknown direction. The knight had hardly recovered when he saw Medea standing in front of him. She lamented that the fall had not killed the knight. But how did she end up here? Lady Belial calmly remarked that she knew of his coming. After all, he had been serving Psyche since he was a child. Could such a person not come for answers? The knight didn't know what she was getting at, but the girl stabbed him with the sword she held in her hand. Looking at him with eyes full of pain and madness, she promised that she would make Psyche feel the same pain as she did. Medea would take everything from her. On its own, the scent of the flowers had no effect, but when combined with the sugar cubes and the poison, it was deadly. Medea grinned. noting how silly it was of her to explain subtleties to a cold corpse. The crunch of a broken branch was heard. A man stepped into the clearing and asked the girl if she was being too open about her actions, even considering she had cleared the area. Without waiting for any response, he bent over the corpse of the knight, with which there was not even a sword. It turns out what happened couldn't even be called a duel. Mia told Healy not to talk nonsense, but rather to tell him whether he had prepared everything or not. The man answered in the affirmative with a half-bow, though he was more interested in whether Psyche was dying. Lady Belial looked away. Psyche was not dying at all and was soon to wake up. After all, everything was going according to plan. At Polly's mansion, Psyche, weakened by the effects of the poison, was trying to eat, but she had an extremely sickly appearance. Her parents were worried that in such a state, she might just pass out in the temple. Nevertheless, Psyche dressed for the trip and left the house to go to the temple. As soon as the mistress left, excitement reigned among the servants. They were worried about the knight who had told them to keep the poisoning a secret. The servants wanted to repay his kindness, so they decided to look for him. A servant girl who knew her way around the forest volunteered, and a man went with her for safety. The woman tried to object, as she was sure she could handle it on her own, but her companion made a number of arguments against it. The knight's disappearance looked suspicious after all. He was born and raised in these lands. Would it be so easy for him to get lost? It was impossible. Something had definitely happened, and perhaps the knight was no longer alive, which meant it was dangerous to look for him alone. While they were riding, the maid noticed the back of an unknown man ahead, and knight's clothes. The servant of Polly's house called out to the man, and he turned around. In the temple, the clergyman placed a holy artifact around Psyche's neck that grants peace this year. The fate of the Eferto Empire was being handed into the fragile hands of a girl. The people around them cheered as, in a deserted place, a man handed the key to the temple to Medea. He warned that this was a day of prayer. Only Psyche Polly is allowed to enter it to prevent misfortune. So if it was discovered that the man had given the key to Lady Belial, his days as a priest were numbered. That explained why he used the cloak, to hide his identity. Medea nodded understandingly. She only trusted this man because Marquis Harry had introduced him. The priest opened a passage deep underground for the girl to descend. The strength of the man, who had settled to the ground from his wounds, was at an end. He felt that he would soon die. This guy that met them, he may not look like this, but he is still very strong. It might be the knight's assassin. Realizing that he didn't have much time, the servant of Polly's house told his companion to run, to call for help. For now. But the girl suddenly pulled her foot out and immediately approached the strange man. Calling him Marquis, she took the cape and asked about the lady. Had she said anything unusual? The dying man could not believe his eyes and ears. Could this maid, who was so anxious about Mistress Polly, really be a traitor? How could she? After all that Madame Psyche had done for her, the maid left these accusations unanswered, turning away. A smirk played across the Marquise's face, noticing that the man was talking too much. As the drawn sword came down, the girl muttered that this was why she had to go here alone. Psyche was praying selflessly, bowing her head respectfully, when resounding footsteps sounded behind her. Medea entered the waters and stopped beside the girl, but Madame Psyche did not look surprised. Lady Belial even assumed that she had been expecting her appearance, but Psyche did not go around and ask Medea what she had done with the knight. The uninvited guest marveled. Why would a lady say such a thing to Psyche? But the girl didn't bother to finish her speech, tipping Medea into the water. Her lips trembled in indignation. Was Medea so offended? For having her crown prince stolen from her. Moreover, she probably didn't love him at all. She only loved his title. Psyche choked back bitter tears at these thoughts. But Lady Belial remained impartial. She looked detachedly at the girl's hysterics, not understanding one thing. Did this naive girl really expect Medea to play this tiresome game of emotions with her, and give up the throne willingly? But Psyche did not calm down. Could Lady Belial really not just back down? Medea pushed Madame Polly away. She had nothing to say. She only lamented that the fate of the empire was now in the hands of someone like Psyche. The girl did not have time to finish her tirade. Hoping to lean on the bottom of the bath, she suddenly fell into the depths. Psyche, who rushed to her with a cry of "My lady," grabbed only air, and Medea plunged into the water as if into an abyss. Amazingly, she could breathe. Was it God's power? Psyche rushed after her into the water, hoping to pull her out to save her, but Lady Belial decided to offer a prayer. And if it really is God who is watching, or Ephrito, then let him give her a chance instead of that stupid girl. Let him help take everything away from Psyche. Manhwa opened her eyes in a place unknown to her, and there were strangers bending over her. They immediately pounced on her with questions about her well-being, calling the girl Madame. When the lady asked where she was, the servants clutched at their hearts and asked her not to joke with them like that. But Medea sincerely did not understand who they were and what nonsense they were talking. Where were her maids? What had happened in the temple? And the old maid at the bedside kept crying and asking, "Why do such terrible things happen to Madame Psyche?" Medea rushed to the mirror. No amount of exhortations from the maids that she should not move much yet, as she might faint, stopped the girl. Lady Belial trembled. In the reflection of the mirror, Psyche was staring back at her. Is this a dream? No, it's not him. The door rattled against the wall as the crown prince burst into the room. Iyalas began to say how happy he was to see Psyche awaken. He was worried that the girl would never open her eyes again, and the mere thought of it brought pain. Immediately the man vowed to administer severe punishment to the lady who dared to harm the crown prince's fiancée and ruin the prayer day. The eyes of the fake Psyche who embraced Iyalas lit up with a joy bordering on madness. Psyche looked in the mirror and saw Lady Medea in front of her. She could not believe it. Stammering in one shoe, the girl clumsily hurried outside. She was surrounded by servants who were worried about the lady's condition and would not let her go outside. It was pouring like a bucket outside, and the Duke ordered to bring the lady to him as soon as she woke up. But the girl suddenly cried out one desperate request: to stop calling her lady. She had to go home, to Polly's mansion, in which Medea was now, in the guise of Psyche, talking to the crown prince. She was smiling radiantly and begging him not to talk about such terrible things as the lady's execution, for surely the girl had her reasons for doing so. Of course it was dust in her eyes. Medea barely restrained herself from making the big mistake of asking to behead the lady immediately. But the real Psyche wouldn't have wished for that. Iyalas sighed. I knew the girl would react like this. A noise was heard outside. In the hallway, the real Psyche in Medea's body was tearing into Madame's chambers. She begged to be allowed to see the lady, for they had something urgent to discuss. But the butler would not let the unexpected guest in. His Majesty is there now. Fake Medea was taken aback when she heard about the crown prince. She thought it was good news, but Iyalas' menacing look did not bode well. He hurled the girl, pinning her by the neck against the wall. He'd been told she was too sick for questioning, but if the lady was well enough, if she had the nerve to come here, she should be grateful that Iyalas hadn't slit Medea's throat yet. Fake Psyche, who was watching this scene, could barely contain her laughter. Ridiculous. It was so ridiculous. The crown prince acted as if Psyche was his only love, as if he would rather die than be without her. But he can't even recognize her in a different guise. The crown prince, on the other hand, forbade Lady Belial to be on the grounds of Count Polly's mansion. Madame could henceforth sleep in peace. Medea contemplated her new body. Fragile arms, lacking strength, and short stature. Even the way she breathed was beautiful, though it was foreign to Medea. From contemplating the body, the girl was interrupted by a maid who wanted to tell her something. And over a cup of tea, as if feeling guilty, she confessed that she had been a spy for the house of Belial, that she had no choice because of her siblings' hospital debts, that Psyche's knight and servant had died not because of a wild mountain beast, but because of Medea. She seemed to believe that from that moment on, Belial lost her power. And the false Psyche consoled the servant girl, saying how sorry she was that she hadn't noticed sooner because the poor thing must have had such a hard time before. In her mind, Melia thought of ripping out her insolent tongue and feeding it to the dogs. But she decided to leave it to its fate, and if after dawn Medea returned to her body, she would kill this maid immediately, and if not, she would let her live. But, what luck, the next morning the girl remained Psyche. Now Medea was certain that their souls had changed places. What should she do if she is cursed to live in this body forever? Lady Medea has many enemies in this world, and she's stronger than all of them put together. But Psyche is not like that. She's weak, she can't go through this like Lady Medea. Psyche, imprisoned in this body, will die as soon as she shows the slightest weakness. Why is she so powerless? What can she do to survive? The lady's loneliness was broken by a maid, who brought food directly to the room, as the lady had missed all her meals for the day, so she made soup to make the lady's stomach feel better. However, the maid was shaking like that. She was stuttering, and the lady was already in a bad mood, so punishment would surely follow now. Medea even swung to strike, and the maid trembled. But the lady only patted the girl on the shoulder and thanked her. There was a ringing silence. The maid was almost crying from the tension. She rambled on that she was just doing her duty, and as soon as the lady was done, the girl could put away the linens. A raven settled on the Marquis's shoulder. Once again, Lady Medea had not opened his letter. Never in the last 7 years had they cut off communication between each other for so long. But the Marquis was sure she was fine, despite her silence. It was Medea after all. However, he still decided to pay her a visit, even if she would reprimand him for visiting without permission. The butler tried to stop him with business, but was unable to hold the Marquis back. Besides, there were strange rumors around Medea, and his lord is so sensitive when it comes to ladies. Fake Psyche was trying on the necklace His Majesty sent for her birthday, that exactly matches the color of His Highness's eyes. The maids admired the jewelry, and outside the window, the trees the Earl planted to aid his daughter's recovery were in full bloom. It must be pleasant to walk under them with His Highness. And so Medea walks beside the Crown Prince through the garden, complaining that she is getting stuffy after being indoors for so long. And in general, His Highness is too worried about her. Yalos, leaning over slightly, asked Psyche to call him by his first name, since they had been engaged for a long time. A smile blossomed on her face as she called her fiancé by his name. Everything was going as smoothly as possible. After her birthday, once they were officially married, and when the Emperor died, she would become a member of the imperial family, one of the 2 sons that would shine on the empire. Everything was going well. But Polly's family is really overprotective. Any move towards the main gate would raise suspicion, but Medea wanted to contact Healy, so she declared to Yalos that she wanted to celebrate her recovery and go to the market. The Crown Prince playfully replied that he would think twice if his bride called him by name again, and they laughed together. At the market, Medea purchased a messenger bird. Now all that remained was to wait for the Crown Prince. Before he stepped back, he said to the bride, "We are discussing matters of state, so keep out of sight." So carefully. Is he drawing a line because Psyche isn't his wife yet? Though she would like to hear it. Nevertheless, all that was left to do was wait behind reading the book. But soon the Crown Prince walked out. Suddenly, Yalos laughed when he saw the title of the book his bride was reading, The Decline and Fall of the Times Before the Esperanto Empire's Delimitation. He felt that while the book was good, was it too complicated for Psyche? If she was so eager to read a picture book, he could just buy her a fairy tale. Manhwa was taken aback. Is this the way Yalos is supposed to behave towards the one he loves? No, there was no doubt about it. The Crown Prince's gaze is full of contempt. The real Psyche hugged her knees in longing. Was it God's will that swapped their bodies? The next day of prayer would be a year from now, but the girl couldn't be sure she'd be back in her own body. She never wanted such a thing to happen to her. And while Psyche mentally called out to her parents and His Highness, a messenger bird knocked uselessly on the window. Candlelight flickered in the darkness. Psyche didn't know where she was, or why it was so dark. She couldn't see anything at all, only the light at the end of the corridor. She shuddered in surprise when she heard an eerie voice asking why all this deception. The voices in the darkness said she wasn't their lady, so why pretend? Psyche trembled, almost crying. The Crown Prince suddenly appeared before her, promising to behead her right here and now. The tenacious fingers of the shadows gripped the girl's hands. She could only scream, beg for help. But the world remained deaf to her. Everything around her was stained with blood. Psyche woke up from her nightmare. A maid turned to her cheerfully, wishing her a good morning. The Crown Prince was still waiting for a response from his bride. But she was silent, and when Yalos leaned toward her, he saw the girl begin to cry. The fake Psyche was asking for his forgiveness. She didn't want to start a conversation about something so as not to bother him unnecessarily. And leaning against her fiancé's ear, she whispered the supposedly terrible truth in his ear. The Crown Prince grew serious and decided to move the conversation to another place, namely to the carriage. There the bride told him that after a series of fainting spells she could hardly remember some things. Everything was as if in a fog, as if someone had chopped up the available memories into disparate pieces. By reading, she was supposedly trying to recover what she had lost. When Yalos heard this convenient truth, he immediately hoped that the girl didn't hate him for his misunderstanding. The fake Psyche, in turn, said she felt guilty because she had forgotten the moments she had shared with His Highness. She asked him to tell her about that distant time when their love was beginning to blossom. The Crown Prince held his bride in his arms as gently as if he cared, but they were both thinking of very different things. Psyche was full of thoughtfulness. What was the cause of the nightmares? Was it guilt? The smiling maid offered the lady scones. Funny, in the beginning, the servants reacted awkwardly to such a drastic change in the mistress's behavior. However, they quickly opened their hearts as if they had only been waiting for the moment all along. Duke Belil rarely appears at home, and his wife is gravely ill. Would Psyche be able to remain undiscovered until nothing changes? The girl was worried. She dared to send a letter to the lady, but she never received a reply. In this whole situation, there was only one person Psyche hoped to avoid meeting. The girl was brought out of her reverie by the news brought by the messenger. The Marquis would soon arrive at the house of Belial. Heliotravium is the young Marquis and head of the Travium family. While still a very young boy, he lost his parents in an accident. He was only 14 years old at the time. Without even giving him time to grieve, the greedy nobles tried to influence the Marquis and quickly ruined his family. That's when he met Lady Medea. Using her guidance, he was quickly restored to the role of head of the House of Travium, and in the year of his adulthood has already surprised society with his success in the military field. After that, the Marquis' family entered its golden age and blossomed right before his eyes. The lady and the Marquis have known each other for 7 years. Will Psyche be able to deceive him? This troubled the girl quite a bit. She had never interacted with Heliotravium before, as she was frightened by that strange and somewhat sinister aura emanating from him. And here he is in front of her, smiling and taking an interest in her, calling her Lady Medea. Psyche tried to keep a straight face, fitting her role. The Marquis, on the other hand, stated that he had long dreamed of meeting her. Despite his friendliness, Helio, first of all, assessed the situation. His fears were not confirmed and everything in Belial's house looked relatively peaceful, although the peace itself was already suspicious. Unexpectedly, the Duke of Belial came out to meet them. It was the first time Psyche had seen Lady Medea's father so close. She was glad that he had come, but for a moment the Marquis's gaze became so fierce. The girl even thought that he had guessed the exchange of bodies. In fact, it was impossible, and she understood that, but she was still nervous. If only they continued the conversation elsewhere. Suddenly, the Duke suggested that Helio compete with his daughter again. It had been a long time since their last tournament, and Medea was a bit depressed. The obsequious maids immediately offered to escort the Duke to the training ground, while the rest of the group anticipated an interesting confrontation. Psyche was caught off guard. She tried to object, to say she wasn't ready, but suddenly the Marquis grabbed a braid of her dark hair. He looked at her thoughtfully. The lady had never braided her hair like that before. This was the first time in the Marquis's memory. Psyche felt as if she'd been splashed with ice water. Her heart raced in her chest with fear. Here came the first misstep. After a while, the fake Lady Medea still had to go to the training ground. There were whispers of admiration all around. A lot of water had flowed since the Marquis and lady had last fought. Helio got into a stance, asking my lady to be gentle with him. This drove Psyche into even more ennui, since the best swordsman is making such a request to her. Just how strong is Lady Medea? Compared to her, would Psyche even be able to lift this piece of metal? The girl made an attempt, hoping for nothing, but she succeeded. She couldn't imagine how such a thing was even possible. Was it because she had Lady Medea's power in her? Psyche grasped the hilt with one hand, thinking she was holding the weapon correctly. The observant Marquis immediately remembered how Lady Medea had taught him how to hold the sword. He could hear the girl's words as if they were real. One hand should be at the bottom of the hilt and the other on top. This would help hold the sword despite the weight. Helio quickly approached the fake Medea and grabbed the blade. Watching with wild eyes, he noticed the strangeness of what was happening. The sword was being held with both hands, and there was no way Lady Medea would make such a basic mistake. So who was in front of him now? Psyche trembled like a wasp leaf. Has she been exposed? But she doesn't want to die. The girl frantically tried to think of what a real Lady Medea would do. Using her years of observation, she decided that a lady would have seduced the Marquis by spiking him with a question about familiarity. She clearly wouldn't have liked the fact that this insolent twerp had just addressed her as you. Psyche, trying to make a menacing appearance, resented the Marquis referring to himself as you and accused him of forgetting things that had been done for him. Helio was confused. The girl's words sounded too naive, not at all like Lady Medea, but if it wasn't her, then who was it? The Marquis had a sneaking doubt that he was mistaken. Then he did something Psyche had not expected. He voluntarily stepped on the tip of the blade. The Marquis asked my lady to punish him, a loyal servant, for crossing the boundaries of what was permissible. He was prepared to pay for this insult with his own blood. But the lady threw away the bloody sword. She announced the end of the training. The blade was picked up by the servants, surprised that blood had been spilled in the practice duel. Of course, the lady and Marquis had always used real swords, but this had never happened before. And it was unclear what cat had run between them. A little later, Helio apologized for the commotion he had caused, but the lady waved it away, asking him to forget the incident. Then the Marquis, a little hesitated, reminded about the banquet in the royal palace, which must be attended by the lady. He asked permission to act as her escort. Psyche scrutinized the face of her interlocutor. His eyes had turned red. He must be barely holding back tears. The girl, overpowering herself, touched the Marquis and gave her consent to his proposal. Psyche's hand began to tremble afterward. She never imagined that she would be able to pull off such a thing. But after thinking about it, Psyche decided that it was wrong to say so. It was not she who could do it, but Lady Medea. The Marquis's butler marveled at the sudden downpour. Just then a carriage arrived with his lord, over whom a servant opened an umbrella. The Marquis was dismayed. Today was the first time the lady had called him Helio since his coming-of-age ceremony. Before that, she had always used the nickname Heli. Something had clearly changed, but at what point? Late at night, the real Medea was still awake. She explained to the maids that she was too excited before His Highness's birthday. In just a week's time, she and the Crown Prince would appear in public together again, and for the first time since their engagement. The banquet would bring together all the high society of the state and influential people from other countries. The guests would be treated to fantastic performances and delectable viands. The maid's heart fluttered at the thought that their lord's couple would be at the epicenter of this celebration. This girl was even more excited than their madam. The madam herself, however, stopped looking friendly as soon as the doors closed. Medea was growing weary of this game. It had already bored her to tears, so much so that she thought of getting rid of them all. But at the same time she realized that none of this would matter. She had to wait for the wedding with Yalos. The preparations were complete. Bird, lemon, paper. The juice of the lemon as ink will allow you to write a hidden message. The text will only appear if you hold the paper over a fire. Most people wouldn't understand. And Heli should have noticed the strange change in Medea's behavior by now. However, hardly anyone would guess that a body swap had taken place. This letter detailed the recent events. It would be the final piece of the puzzle. Medea fastened the paper to the bird's leg and released it into the wild. The Marquise had not received a message from the true lady, where she wrote that she was at Psyche Polly's mansion. Instead, it was reported to the Crown Prince that the intercepted bird had indeed flown out of Psyche Polly's room during her nightly rounds. Further investigation confirmed that the letter was intended for Markelio of the Travium family. Yalos praised the reporter for a job well done and ordered the pathetic note to be burned. He was going to go to the Count's mansion first thing tomorrow. Medea smirked, for right now the Crown Prince should have intercepted the fake letter by now. The real one had probably reached Heli safely on a cat's tail. The maid was braiding Madame's hair before meeting the Crown Prince. She sincerely did not understand what the man was thinking, showing up without notice of his arrival? Yalos, on the other hand, hardly cared about such formalities now. He was much more interested in Psyche, from whom he was waiting for an explanation. The bride was playing dumb, chattering inspirational nonsense about the happiness she had experienced after a dream involving His Highness. The delusion that as soon as she heard of the groom's visit, she immediately thought of telepathy between them. The Crown Prince twisted it in his favor. Since he comes to Psyche even in night dreams, the bride's love for him is incredibly high. And out of that love, the girl should do Yalos the favor of ceasing all communication with Medea of the Belial family. To be convincing, he uttered the first lines of the letter. At the moment I am at Psyche Polly's mansion. The bride immediately made a sorrowful, frightened look, as if she didn't understand how the Crown Prince knew this. In fact, Medea had long ago noticed the close supervision of the prince's entourage. It would be strange not to feel such vigilant surveillance for 24 hours. Something was troubling the lady. Whenever the figure of Yalos loomed on the horizon, all the minions within a 10-meter radius instantly disappeared. Did his spies not see Psyche as a threat at all if they acted so carelessly? But it was a good thing. Thanks to this fact, Medea would be able to take the necessary measures. That was all in the lady's head, but she said something else out loud, a supposed explanation of the whole situation. According to it, Psyche had recently received a message from the Marquise of Helio. It spoke of Lady Medea's desire to revive their friendship. As proof, the Marquise handed over a letter that contained a fragment of his and the lady's friendly correspondence. Heli, I am at present at Psyche Polly's mansion. I intend to make my peace with her, was what it said. But on the day of the meeting, because of your highness's unexpected visit, the girls did not have time to exchange a single word. But the lady did not retreat and asked about the possibility of meeting at the royal birthday banquet. The prince's fiancée sent the letter back, thus signaling her refusal, in order to save His Highness from unnecessary worries. Fake Psyche finished by saying that she was about to tell him about it, but Yalos seemed to know all the details. And she, like the ultimate fool, didn't realize the whole situation and was so flustered. The girl must have looked so pathetic. The Crown Prince rose from his seat and consoled his bride, saying that he never thought of her as pathetic. He attributed his behavior to concern for his beloved. The servant Yalos told him to bring the dress and jewelry that Psyche would wear to the banquet. The prince tried on a jeweled bracelet on the maiden's hand. Examining it, he noticed that this piece of jewelry would easily cover any bruises that might accidentally form. The chains placed on the madam's hands jingled. Yalos surmised that the lady was probably up to something else, and perhaps this time she would succeed in poisoning Psyche. So he ordered his bride to be locked in the cellar and to make sure that she could not contact the Belial family in any way. The girl was confused. The groom justified all his actions with great love, and he planned to let her out before the royal banquet. But Medea was not deceived by this. A prince willing to lock up the man he loved in a filthy dungeon for protection? That's absurd. This story of reviving old friendships was invented in case the real Psyche in the body of a lady decided to molest them on the day of the banquet. Wouldn't anyone leave the prince alone? However, the servants only stared, and the old nanny cried, crying because Psyche was disappointing His Highness, not because she was being led away to the dungeon. Was there no one in this house in their right mind? Already alone, Yalos pondered his action. Had he been too cruel to his bride? But he had no choice. Medea is like no one else in this world. She is the most wicked, cunning, and shrewd woman. Besides, there was nothing he could do now, and extra precautions couldn't hurt. Even one letter from Psyche, one single line, could tell Medea that something was going wrong. A knock sounded outside the window of Belial's house. A moment and the Marquise appeared in the room. Two knocks on the right window, located directly close to the bed, acted as a signal. It was invented by Helio and Lady Medea to see each other secretly. But right now, Lady Medea, or rather the person in her place, definitely didn't suspect the existence of such a technique. The agitated Psyche tried to resent her, but the Marquis didn't let her finish. He immediately indicated that he was aware of the true identity of the person in front of him, Psyche Polly. The girl found herself once again gripped by fear and incomprehension. How had he guessed? How? She was too slow to react, and she should have pointed the sword in Helio's direction. Turn out to be someone else and Psyche would have been in more danger. There would be many of Medea's acquaintances at the royal banquet for His Highness' birthday. Her demeanor, her speech, even her steps should make her look like a lady of the house of Belial. The Marquis was going to help with that by giving a couple of lessons. And all because he was commanded to keep her safe. Such were the dictates of the real Lady Medea. The royal banquet was 5 days away. Something powerful, strong, and mesmerizing supported the empire. A divine power acting as an invisible support. The two branches of government that took control of it adopted the name Ephrto, as if it had already belonged to them since birth. The first was the royal family, responsible for expanding the empire's influence in the political arena. The second was the Holy Church, seeking to maintain stability within. It was these two factions that became some sort of pillars, setting the stage for the rest of history to follow. The lands in question had welcomed 2 springs and 2 winters. The debutante, marking the beginning of the bloom, was already awaited by many socialites. 3 years ago. It was an important day. Count Polly's daughter was finally stepping into the limelight. The society world had already lost all hope of seeing her face. There were various rumors as to why. Some said that the poor girl was chronically ill, others said that the countess had given birth to a demon instead of a child, and others wrote off everything to the fact that the count hid his daughter out of boundless paternal love and anxiety. The men asked Lady Medea's opinion on the matter. She expressed herself evasively. Many influential people concealed disadvantages to the family. Some did the same, but with jewelry and something rare. After such an answer, the people around cancelled out the lady's discernment. Such were the roles in society. One was vilified long before appearing in high society, while the other gained influence as a young girl. This constituted a favor given to the powerful of the world, though Medea considered these instances to be very few. Psyche's appearance came as a great shock to Medea. The Marquise advised Psyche to straighten her back and cheer up. She had to organize the information he had given her in her head to be at least a little closer to Lady Medea's level. The girl understood the importance, but it was so difficult. Did the lady really learn a huge pile of material at the age of 8? Helio coughed, asking Psyche not to look at him so pitifully while she was in the lady's body. Now he reflected on the fact that perhaps it wasn't such a bad thing that Lady Medea didn't show emotion in public. Staying cold and impassive with others was necessary for Psyche now. Would she be able to do it alone? Humanities, general erudition, political science? The girl lacked skills in all of the aforementioned subjects. At least she had instincts that turned on at critical moments. The Marquise could only hope for them. Medea, still locked up, seriously wondered if the prince was going to release her. He was now just being reported on the situation at the Duke's estate, devoid of any suspicion. Yalos nodded. He would believe it this time. 2 were better than 1, after all. The Marquise, admittedly, was confused by the sight of the fake Medea's clothes. What she wore to the banquet was quite extravagant. It was only after Helio's remark and clarification that Psyche realized how strange her outfit looked. The girl had dressed as if she were some sort of honored guest. The Marquis reminded Psyche again she was not a crown princess now. If she stood out, she would inevitably put herself in danger. The girl understood, but this evening was special. She had been looking forward to it for a long time. Last time His Highness was busy with important state affairs, so he promised to celebrate his birthday with her this year. That was what Yalos was talking about to his bride as he kissed her hand. They promised each other that after countless trials they would still stand side by side. Medea's thoughts, however, were on something else entirely. That day, when she had to go down into the cellar of the Count's estate, she wondered what exactly the Polly family was hiding there under the guise of a modest exterior. Of course she had expected to see a chapel, but it would have been more fun if it had been a real prison. But the place was an ordinary room. An unremarkable den where someone had lived a long time ago. Psyche, for example. She had spent her entire life in that room until the day of her debut at the age of 19. But why? How on earth did Yalos know about this room? A booming voice sounded. It introduced those who came out together, the wings of the empire, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Yalos Orn Ephrto and Madame Psyche Polly of the Polly family. Raucous applause filled the hall. Psyche, in Lady Belial's body, was already here. The real Medea had caught a glimpse of her from the balcony, where she stood beside the prince. They had met at last, but they appeared in unfamiliar roles. Back then, Psyche's radiant smile had made Medea want to strangle the girl with her own hands, but today, who did Madame Polly see? A tyrant who had stolen the love of her life, or a man who had taken her problems on his shoulders? The audience applauded deafeningly. Psyche heard whispers of how beautiful the couple was, the pride of Epherto. The girl stood there as if struck by thunder. Why hadn't anyone around her noticed the switch? After all, she was the only person who should be by His Highness' side. At the last moment, when Psyche was ready to get out of her seat, she was pulled away by the Marquis. He reminded her that all these people around are gossiping on purpose to anger Lady Belial. They can only watch what is happening. The Crown Prince courteously invited his bride to the first dance, and to the sound of music the couple swirled around the hall. Yalos marveled softly that the girl had never once stepped on his foot in all this time. It was frustrating and gratifying at the same time. The girl had done a good job and was literally saving the prince from embarrassment this evening. Medea smiled, noticing Yalos' happy look. The prince explained that he was thinking of a small gift for her, even though the birthday was his. Allegedly, it wasn't until he met Psyche that he learned the true meaning of life. Wow. Even the Crown Prince can pour honey in his ears? He could talk all the pleasantries he wanted. But meaning? Yalos can't tell his bride from another girl. And that's assuming both are right under his nose. The prince and his bride accepted gifts from the invited guests. They sycophanted, promised to pray for his prosperity and longevity, called him high-flown titles. About halfway through, a servant reported to Yalos that special guests had arrived. Thereupon the prince promptly left the bride. Medea, from whose face every smile had slipped as soon as the groom left, went with a confident step into the hall. From the balcony she was noticed by the Marquis. Psyche was looking confusedly for the Marquis of Travium when the girl approached her. Harmless in appearance, she immediately began to disparage Lady Belial by mentioning rumors that Medea was passionately in love with His Highness. This unpleasant person was Count Seir's daughter. The Marquis of Travium had mentioned her. This girl followed Lady Medea everywhere, but she ignored her to no end. Therefore, Lady Seir had been getting back at Psyche with her nasty antics, like dousing her with water. The Marquis assumed that Lady Seir must be regretting her actions right now. She certainly didn't expect to see Psyche in the Crown Princess place. Lady Seir was obsessed with the desire for power and influence in society, and was not averse to using any method to rehabilitate herself in the eyes of the Polly family. It was not surprising that she had tried to ridicule Lady Medea, thus giving Psyche a kind of support. But on the other hand, maybe it was for the best. Psyche wondered if she could fool anyone other than the Marquis. Medea gazed pensively at the sky. She thought everything seemed to be going according to plan, but her heart felt like she had managed to fall into a trap. It seems Polly's family is closely connected to the Holy Church. This information is a well-guarded secret that only the imperial family knows about. Even Lady Medea, who has thoroughly studied the histories of all the noble families, didn't have a clue about it. The relationship between the two factions is, to put it mildly, disgusting. But there is a reason why Yalos chose Psyche to replace the Crown Princess. It's just like a fairy tale. The hero overcomes many obstacles for the sake of his love. But Medea knew the truth. There must be something else, some missing piece of the puzzle that she was missing. Suddenly, the Marquis jumped onto the balcony straight from the tree. Medea smiled, greeting Heli. From that smile, that unique tone, the Marquis recognized her. Lady Medea, albeit in someone else's body. He was, after all, so concerned for her well-being. Psyche, smirking, clarified about the passionate crush. Unexpectedly, she confirmed that such a version was hard to deny. Then, with an innocent look, the girl said that if it weren't for her insanity, she wouldn't have turned a blind eye to such an insolent attitude towards herself, and maybe she should have cut Lady Seir's throat a long time ago. Lady Seir was stunned. Her eyes were filled with fear and incomprehension. Suddenly the other ladies stepped forward. They said that Lady Seir was not herself, and that she should not have made a fuss over some unfounded rumor. Lady Seir was furious. A moment ago these girls had been asking her to speak to Lady Medea because they were afraid, and now they were acting as if they had nothing to do with it. They all wondered if it was true that Lady Medea was in love with His Highness. How would things turn out if Psyche answered incorrectly? However, A strange sight unfolded before the girl. House Seer's daughter, whom she had always feared, now looked no better than a weak pawn. If it was that simple, if Psyche could do it, she could live like Lady Medea. Just then, the girl heard a scrap of conversation among the servants. They were discussing how happy the prince looked, discussing their wedding to Madame Polly. Psyche was sobered by this. She felt sick and the world blurred before her eyes. Why did she have to be proud and arrogant now, living like Lady Medea? Was there any use in it at all? Looking down on everyone, killing people with a slight movement of the hand. Is that happiness? The person Psyche wanted to protect no longer exists. She must be going crazy. Everything around her must be a nightmare and she can't wake up. Crying bitterly, the girl raised her head with a desperate cry. She hated it all. She wanted to go back. She wanted to go back to her body. Crown Prince Yalos gathered in front of him all the members of the elite knight order that the imperial family had raised for many years. Their target was extremely weak and a single fighter would suffice, but His Highness needed assurance. Yalos Orna Eferto ordered the head of his bride, Psyche Polly, to be brought to him. No one would ever think of accusing the crown prince of murdering the future crown princess during his own birthday banquet. Yalos will merely fulfill the role of a victim in this tragic story. The identity of the one who masterminded this crime would remain a mystery. The Marquis summarized what he had heard from Lady Medea. If the crown prince does not marry her within a year, her soul will move into her body during the annual prayer. If nothing happens on that day, Medea will probably never be able to return to her original state again. But even though the girl told a lot of things, she didn't bother Helio with talking about the nice finds in the basement. He never asks about anything and is always so happy to be around Medea. The girl was taking advantage of that, including now. She wanted Hilly to try to get something about Yalos out of Psyche, since the prince was obviously not telling her something. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of foreign footsteps. The Marquis hurried to say goodbye to the lady, but as a farewell he handed her a small gift in a roll. Barely glancing at the contents of the roll, Medea grinned. Her unlikely friend knew her very well. Interrupting the conversation between the Marquis and the lady, the knight conveyed that His Highness was looking for a bride. He was waiting for the girl in the garden where he wanted to present some special gift. The Marquis pressed his lips together. If they had a little more time, he would really like to say something. Regardless of which vessel Lady Medea's soul would be transferred into, she would remain the only person Helio would give his life for. When the Marquis returned to the common room, he realized that Psyche was nowhere to be found. And after all, he had left the girl unattended for only a few minutes. One must not relax with her. The Marquis was suddenly approached by Lady Sarah. With the most innocent look she could, she asked Helio to put in a good word for her in front of Lady Medea, because she had recently said something that could offend the noblewoman, so offensive that she left the hall. The Marquis only asked the direction in which the girl had gone, and, having caught Lady Sarah's shoulder, went in search of Psyche. The knights led Medea farther and farther away from the castle. At the girl's questions, they evasively remarked that they were merely following His Highness's orders. The closest of the knights suddenly drew his sword and chopped with his blade, but the girl suddenly dodged. Or did she accidentally slip after all? Was it the madam's luck or bad luck? Medea didn't understand. Why did so many people from an elite order of knights decide to attack a helpless person like Psyche? They must be out of their minds, but Lady Belial had never been timid in front of the imperial family. The knight asked their prince's fiancée not to move so that everything would end quickly and more or less painlessly. The Marquise finally found Psyche. She was surprisingly well hidden. Helio lowered himself down beside her. The girl was crying sorrowfully and oblivious to everything around her. The Marquis never thought until this day that he would see Lady Medea in tears. Perhaps he would never witness such a scene again. Psyche turned to the Marquis, noticing him. She felt pathetic and foolish. As soon as someone had called out His Highness, her feet had carried the girl to the exit on their own. She just wasn't sure she wouldn't cry in the hall in front of everyone. Psyche realized that she was no match for Lady Medea. The one is simply amazing, for all is still unrevealed. Not even by the prince. Psyche was choked with bitterness and despair. The tears wouldn't stop. Sooner or later she would make the mistake again and run away with her tail between her legs. And one day someone would find out what a weak person Psyche really was. Wouldn't she ruin with that all that Lady Medea had tried and worked for over the years? The Marquise was sure the lady would never allow such a thing to happen. She's too powerful to get knocked out over something so insignificant. How ironic that sounded, considering Lady Medea was now on the cusp of death. And Psyche suddenly had an epiphany. Heliotrovium was in love with Lady Medea. The Marquise did not confirm this hunch, but it was clear without words. An epiphany came upon Medea as suddenly as the first snow that came down and powdered her dirty hair. She was sure that she had become Psyche by the will of the guardian god, who had merely heard her prayers. But perhaps it was all for this moment. The knights hurried their comrade, who already had too much blood left of him. But suddenly the man fell, and there was a deafening half-crazed laugh and a shriek from the fake Psyche. What a pity. The blood on the ground, on the once beautiful dress, was not Medea's. Haley's gift of a small dagger gleamed in the girl's hands. It came in handy. The knights went numb. She had killed a man with a single blow. Was this woman really Psyche? Before the knight could order them to keep their distance, Medea was already at his side. The man didn't have time to even just draw his sword. The lady, on the other hand, asked him a question, threatening him with swift retribution. Who ordered her to be killed? Intruders from another kingdom, or were the knights doing the crown prince's will? Medea wondered, since when did she begin to hate Psyche? Why had such a strong contempt for this person built up inside? It was like ice was cracking inside. The girl was annoyed, sickened by all of these circumstances, after all, having to fight in her place. Perhaps the guardian god Eferto had switched their souls so that it was Medea who would die today. The knight she had questioned about who exactly had ordered her to be killed was speechless. The girl even got ready to slit his throat after all, as another knight jumped up behind her. He struck a swift blow that Medea barely had time to block. As the knight coughed, he realized with a squeak that Psyche was about to kill him. They had underestimated the enemy. Medea wiped the blood from her face. The battle had just begun, and the soldiers in front of her were no ordinary soldiers. They must have expected Psyche to be a weak, defenseless girl who had never held a weapon in her life. But despite the surprise from the enemy, the warriors quickly adapted. True knights. The leader gave his comrades an order. They were to fight the woman in front of them as an equal opponent, not as a helpless lady. Medea, however, did not consider them a problem. No matter how hard this handful of pathetic bastards tried, it would be ridiculously easy to handle, though with such frail hands barely blocking a blow. It would be a bit hard. His Highness came over to greet and congratulate the noble who had recently inherited the Henel kingdom. Psyche was nowhere to be seen in the hall. Yalos smirked. It looked like everything had gone well. Marquise and Psyche were returning to the hall. Helio promised not to take a step away from the girl. He understood Psyche's feelings, but she was giving up too quickly. The Marquis would advise her to try to act more deliberately at times like this. Besides, Helio had long ago noticed Psyche's envy towards Lady Medea. Hearing this, the girl froze. Tears once again covered her gaze. It was unpleasant to admit, but it was indeed as the Marquise had said. Could Psyche not be envious? The lady is extraordinarily strong. And this extraordinarily strong Lady Medea was now thinking about the fact that she would not be able to face the knight in close combat. In physical capabilities, the current frail body was undoubtedly inferior. Therefore, one had to dodge the blows. Taking a knee, Medea scooped up a handful of earth and poured it directly into the face of her opponent. The knight called it cowardly and mean-spirited. The moment of confusion was enough for Medea to strike, and the knight even checked in which hand she was holding the blade, but the girl attacked from the other side. It didn't help. The lady straightened up and grinned wickedly. It was not for her to listen to the cowardly behavior of blowing dust in her eyes from the people who had attacked an innocent girl in a mob. Medea saw no problem in killing them. They didn't belong to any of the official orders of knighthood. In the end, she had only one option: to win. The girl kept dodging the enemy's attacks and aiming her blade at the heart area. This tactic should help to finish the fight without too many casualties. The knights themselves were terrified. They couldn't understand how some brat managed to get rid of trained people in just a couple of seconds. They are an elite order of knights created by the imperial family. Their leader was so proud when His Highness Yalo selected all the members by himself. Only one person, the strongest knight in the empire, could withstand such a fight, Marquise Travium. Medea paused. She was well aware of the principles and characters of the people in front of her. Even if the lady broke their fingers and gouged out their eyes, they would still remain their master's loyal dogs until the bitter end. Sighing heavily, Medea asked one last time the name of the one who ordered the assassination. The knights got the impression that she already knew the answer, just looking for confirmation of her hunches. Medea didn't care about anything. She had always believed in the changeability of fate.
So, we look forward to your comments about this story. To not miss new videos, please subscribe to notifications. Thanks for watching.